All right. Good morning, everybody, and thank you all for being here. We have some big news this morning here in the province of Ontario. Today, I can reveal that the Ontario NDP has obtained documents through a Freedom of Information request from Infrastructure Ontario that contains mounting evidence of a rigged process for the Ontario Place redevelopment. A rigged process that ultimately saw this public parkland handed over to a very particular private luxury spa company. These documents include a parking study from Infrastructure Ontario from January 2021 that mentions Therme and its $500 million parking garage nearly 2 years before the public even knew about it. It suggests that Mr. Ford gifted a publicly funded $500 million parking garage to Surma and hid it from the public for nearly 2 years. That's $500 million of Ontarians' money being spent on an elite luxury spa while people were pleading for investment in our emergency rooms and in our schools. Instead of helping people, Doug Ford's only priority seems to be to help wealthy insiders get even richer from his shady backroom deals. His behavior is increasingly unethical, and people's hard-earned money is being used to pay for it. And that's just not okay. We knew something was sketchy about the Greenbelt grab, and there's increasing evidence that something is wrong with this deal too. That's why we've tabled a motion in the legislature to terminate the lease with Therme. This government needs to stop the transfer of public funds to private profits, and we're not going to be satisfied until they do that. Now, I'm very happy to be joined by some of my colleagues, and they're going to take over, and I'm going to be handing this over to our infrastructure critic, Jennifer French, to share some more details. Jennifer?
Thank you very much, Marit, and good morning, everyone. For months, we have been sounding the alarm on the Ford government's absurd plan to put a luxury spa on Ontario Place. Last week, we learned that the Conservative Infrastructure Minister was hiding even more information on the Ontario Place project. So far, she has failed to show us the business case for why the Ontario Science Centre needs to be moved to Ontario Place. I don't believe she has a business case. Media reports recently showed that despite being told by the Ontario Place Corporation's chair that they had had almost 3 million visitors last year, Minister Surma tried to sell us on the lie that no one enjoys Ontario Place. In her own words, quote, Ontario Place has been sitting there, no one has been going there, I drive by it frequently, and it's not enjoyed. Nonsense. We also learned that the Ministry of Infrastructure has not made public Ontario Place Corporation's annual reports since 2018. That is 5 years, no reports, yet they sit on her desk. During committee, when I asked Michael Lindsay, the CEO of Infrastructure Ontario, about whether or not there was a fairness monitor during the procurement process, he told us that there was no fairness monitor, which is standard for large procurements to ensure that there is no funny business. A few days before the submission deadline for the Ontario Place project, the deadline was suddenly extended by 3 weeks. IO's own CEO confirmed to me at committee that while other bids had been received, Therme's bid had not been received before the deadline had been extended. We asked to see what scoring criteria were used to evaluate the bids. Infrastructure Ontario could not provide any. We asked to see the scorecards for each bid. Infrastructure Ontario could not provide any. Now we see that the government's internal documents show the underground parking garage was being planned 2 years before the public knew about it. Despite the January 2021 document showing the parking garage, when Ford Conservatives unveiled their design concepts 6 months later, in July of 2021, they suspiciously did not include the parking structure in their renderings. The government told bidders on the Ontario Place redevelopment that they had to use whatever parking was already available and that the government would not fund any additional facilities. However, When Therme won the bid, suddenly they were offered a brand new publicly funded parking garage that was not offered to other bidders. So we would like to know, when did the government commit to this $500 million parking garage, and why have they refused to be transparent with Ontarians about this process? And I will turn it over to Chris Glover, the MPP for Spadina-Fort York.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. So the FOI document that the NDP obtained notes, quote, a government obligation, unquote, which states that it is recommended that the government assume responsibility for developing the parking solution on the site of Ontario Place. And last week, we raised questions about how much taxpayer money is being spent on this ridiculous luxury spa project. So we have to ask again, exactly what obligation did this government make to Therme or any other Ontario Place developers? Was the procurement process even fair? And did the parking advantage get offered to other bidders or just to Therme? Did the government make this obligation after Therme won the bid? Did Infrastructure Ontario know that the viability of Therme's mega spa proposal depended on a government-funded parking garage? The FOI document also clearly notes that the high impact that the below-grade parking structure would have on Lakeshore Road and lagoons, and the reason that this parking garage is so expensive is because they're essentially trying to build a 5-story underground parking garage right beside the lake, and somehow it has to be watertight. In the middle of a climate emergency, the Ford Conservatives exempted projects like Therme's from an environmental assessment, and this project requires cutting down 850 mature trees, and they're not even considering the impact of filling in the shoreline of Ontario. So the question really is, what has Ford signed Ontarians up for? And I'll pass it to my colleague, MPP Butila Carpoche.
Thank you, Chris. The information we know about Ford's Ontario Place redevelopment project is troubling. Every piece of information that has come out so far tells us that the Ford Conservative government is hiding something bigger, and it leads to more questions. Why is the Minister of Infrastructure hiding information to make it look like nobody visits Ontario Place? Why is it that Infrastructure Ontario extended the deadline, coincidentally, to give Therme enough time to submit their bid, despite having submissions from others? Why is there an Infrastructure Ontario document that shows plans to build a below-grade parking structure next to Therme 2 years before the public was ever informed about this parking structure? When did the government know they would be gifting Therme a taxpayer-funded parking facility? What else has the Ford Conservative government promised this foreign luxury spa company in addition to a 95-year-long lease of precious public waterfront land? We need answers, and we need to cancel this lease. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to my colleagues. Just to recap very briefly, we have the Ontario NDP has obtained documents through a Freedom of Information request from Infrastructure Ontario that does provide, I think, mounting evidence of a rigged process for the Ontario Place redevelopment. And this afternoon, in debate of our opposition motion, we'll be making the case again for why this government needs to reveal the business case and all the details of this deal and reverse course, terminate the lease with Therme. And with that, I'm very happy to take any questions.
At that same committee meeting earlier this year, Matthew Lindsay was saying that Therme wasn't the only one that wanted more parking. I believe multiple bidders, in fact, a significant number of them, said the amount of parking offered would need to be enhanced to suit their business needs or wants. So, and it seems like you guys are really trying to draw a line between Therme and the parking. Do you think that's fair, given that there were other bidders who clearly needed this as well, or wanted this?
Well, I certainly appreciate that you have reviewed the Hansard there. There weren't many answers given by Mr. Lindsay. But I will say that while there were other people interested in getting in on this game, and there were other people who appreciated having the extension, when we look at the FOI documents and we look at the sketches and we look at the parking plan, funny that the word Therme is written on it, right? So there are some important lines to be drawn, and I think that this begs closer a closer investigation, right? This requires an important look, because we're talking about a lot of money, about a public space, and that they are trying desperately to privatize. And I don't think that we have to privatize in order to revitalize Ontario Place. And certainly any malarkey we're being handed by the minister is just that.
Do you guys have more FOIs like this out? Like, is there potentially more kind of information along these lines coming out soon?
I will say stay tuned, because certainly what we have received back in terms of FOI, I would say is insufficient. Some of what has been redacted and whatnot leads us to really want to continue to dig. So we appreciate the interest. I mean, certainly there is interest across the province, but in the GTA, we want to keep our public goods good and public.
So what exactly are you afraid has happened here? That
the
government really wanted a spa, or is there something corrupt here? What are you thinking is happening here?
I appreciate that you asked if there's something corrupt. We are asking the same. Certainly what we have seen when it comes to the Greenbelt grab, there isn't a lot of trust happening with this government. Having sat opposite both Michael Lindsay, the CEO of Infrastructure Ontario, and opposite Minister Surma, every question we asked about transparency, every question that we asked about the procurement process, we were met with, in effect, just trust us. And we don't. So is there corruption? I would say I hope not, but I don't have much confidence in this process, and there is no reason for us to have that confidence without a fairness monitor, without the scorecards, without eyes on this, and all of these red flags when we are able to tease out parts of the process make us think that this is not a government that is playing by the rules. It seems that they are making them up mid-game because they think they can, because they're behind a curtain.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Jennifer. I would just add that, and thank you so much, Jennifer. It's we are dealing with a government that is already being caught out, and one of the greatest corruption scandals that this province, this country has ever seen. A premier who is under criminal investigation now by the RCMP. So I think this casts a cloud. There's a cloud over this government and every deal that they make and every scheme that they have. And so we're going to continue to try to shine a light on every aspect of this deal and others, because I think the people of Ontario need their trust in government restored, and we need to bring back some integrity.
On the reports that Minister Surma is supposedly sitting on, it was said that, I think at the press release last week, it was saying that there is a release date for the 2021. Can you explain what's going on with it? So they are coming out, but they're not coming out? What's happening here?
I appreciate your questions. I have the same ones in terms of what is happening here. When we had done some research and were able to hear back from Ontario Place Corporation about their reports, they had done, it's my understanding they had done their side of the work and had submitted them to government, to the Ministry of Infrastructure, and it has to go through the Ministry of Infrastructure and back to the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, and then they're made public. So the fact that those reports that we haven't seen since 2018 have been submitted, I understand 2018 and 2019 are sitting on a desk somewhere or in a drawer. I'm not sure where, but they are with the ministry, and that the 2021 has been slated to be posted, I think, by February 28th. Anyway, and that the 2022 is, I'm not sure, is nowhere to be found. So these are questions for the minister, that if they have received those reports and are sitting on them, my guess is that they don't tell the story that they would like us to believe.
And that story is that nobody comes to Ontario Place.
The story that Minister Surma is trying to sell, that nobody likes Ontario Place and it's pathetic and sad and underutilized, is nonsense. No one believes it. There's no reason to believe it. She has been counseled herself and knows that almost 3 million people visited this past year. So yes, the story that they're trying to make us believe is not real. Again. Thanks. I'm trying to bump you off stage.
All right.
I think I'm good.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.